Later on, we decided to have another baby, and Carol was born at home with Dr. Chalmers, weighing £8 5 ounces. We were thrilled to have a little girl, and she was as good as gold. The first morning after we had her, we woke up to find Paul in the cot with the baby. He thought she was wonderful, and he had a dummy too. As I was working around the house, I would put Carol on the settee and prop her bottle up so she could feed. But I couldn't work out how she would drink her milk so quickly, crying with hunger again within half an hour. So one day I put her on the settee and settled her with the bottle, then stood peeping around the door by the kitchen. Next thing, here came Uncle Paul, sneaking quietly into the living room. He took her bottle and then ran behind the couch, drank the milk and put the bottle back in her mouth when he finished. We had to laugh, but had to stop him, otherwise she would have faded away to nothing. When the weather was fine, I would meet Auntie Beryl and go down the bays, or would go up to Ravenhill or down to Cumberland Park. We used to take a picnic and stay out all day. Then we'd come home just before Bampa came home from work. They both had the habit of falling asleep on the bus, and you imagine how difficult it was to cope with 2 sleeping children and all the other things we had to carry. Whenever he could, Bampa would either meet us down the beach or he'd come to the bus stop to help. We'd bring them in, undress them, put their pyjamas on and put them to bed, and they'd never wake up until the next morning. That's what I called good children. A few years later, Mike was born. He was a big baby at £9 8 ounces. I had a good pregnancy with no morning sickness or any other problems. But when I went into labour, everything went wrong and I was rushed into hospital. I used to tell Carol that I was going to have the baby at home, which was a silly thing to do really, as she was excited. I know they told me I had a little boy, but I was so ill it never registered. I was in hospital for 17 days before they let me home, and from the moment we opened the front door and came in, he cried and cried. He was home for 2 weeks and he was very ill. Finally, we had the doctor out 4 times in one day, and they admitted him to Hill House Hospital with gastroenteritis. We were so afraid that we were going to lose him. He wasn't allowed any milk or baby food, and we had to boil everything. It was a hard struggle, but we got him through the first 2 years, the time that the doctor said would be the most difficult for him. Uncle Ray picked me up from hospital just a few days after Auntie Anne had a baby boy named Andrew. It was awful when they discovered that he had water on the brain and his lungs weren't fully developed. He only lived for 12 hours or so. I told Ray to have a look at the baby before we got into the car, and he did, giving him a kiss and saying he was beautiful. I told him that as soon as I could, I would get to the hospital to see Anne and their new baby, but Ray didn't say anything. Auntie Carol ignored me completely in the car, but was chatting away to Uncle Ray and Nana. When everything settled and everyone had seen the baby, we had a cup of tea, and Bampa told me that Ray's baby had died. I was terribly upset because I had been boasting about my baby Michael, and Ray never said a word, as he didn't want to spoil our homecoming. As I said, Carol wouldn't speak to me at all, and I couldn't take her out because I wasn't allowed out the door for 3 months. Then one day she came home from school and she was awful naughty, and I shouted at her. She turned around and said, "I hate you. You're a liar, you are." I was completely stunned and didn't have a clue what I'd done wrong. I sat her down, though she wouldn't let me touch her, and asked her what was wrong. She said that I told her I wasn't going away to have the new baby, but I did, and left her for a long time. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there and broke my heart to think that for these few weeks this had been what was wrong with her. She thought I deserted her and Paul to go and get a new baby, and that I didn't care about them. She was fine afterwards and would help to bath Mike. She was, and still is, funnily enough, 4.5 years older than him. Everything turned up well in the end, but wherever we took him, he used to cry all the time. One day I told Bampa to take him away from us to give the other kids a break. He did, and while he was out, asked Mike what was the matter, and he replied, "Oh, I don't know." I think he was so used to crying that the tears just came automatically. When Michael was 3, Carol and Paul were off school with German measles. I went down to get some shopping at Ken's mini market and had some shocking news when I was on my way home. The man who used to run the Mile End said he had some terrible news. Bertie Dirk had just died. I said he was being soft, as I had only just been talking to him before he went up to the doctors. He explained that he had collapsed and died of a heart attack in Dr. Anderson's surgery. It really was such a terrible shock, and he was such a lovely man. It was awful. Auntie Pauline and Uncle Jeff were living with Nana at the time, so luckily she had someone there with her. I phoned the Convelling Works to get Bampa home, and when he came in, Michael told him that Granpa had fainted up in the doctors and died.